I have worked in death care for most of my adult life, long enough to understand that grief follows patterns, long enough to recognize when a family needs silence instead of reassurance, long enough to know that buildings, especially old ones, absorb more than people realize. You develop a professional detachment in this work, a necessary separation between the emotional weight of loss and the technical demands of preparation, documentation, respectful handling of remains. You learn to read death certificates without flinching, to navigate family conflicts with diplomatic precision, to maintain chain of custody protocols even when exhaustion makes your hands shake. But there are cases that shatter that detachment completely. Cases where what you document contradicts everything you understand about how the dead behave. Cases where your paperwork tells you one story while the evidence in front of you tells another. Cases that make you question not just your professional training, but the fundamental boundary between the living and the dead. My name is Daniel Mercer, and I need to tell you about Lillian Harper. Not because I have answers, because I do not. Not because I can explain what happened in procedural terms, because I cannot. But because what I witnessed during the 3 days following her intake in March of 2021 changed my understanding of death, containment, and the things funeral homes carry in ways I am still processing. And because 2 years later, I still see those tally marks on the wall, still remember what the ledger said, still wonder how many bodies never truly left Briarwood at all. This is not speculation. This is not misinterpretation of incomplete records. This is documented fact. Intake logs, refrigeration access records, physical evidence I photographed myself, and patterns spanning 6 decades. What happened at Briarwood Funeral Services over the course of my 4-month employment defies every principle of death care protocols and forensic preservation I learned in my 15 years in the industry. March 2021. I had been operations manager at Briarwood for 3 months, standard workload for a small-town funeral home in western Pennsylvania. Chain of custody procedures, family consultations, the controlled precision that death care requires when a community trusts you with their most vulnerable moments. Then, Lillian Harper arrived. 82 years old, natural causes, private services only, completely unremarkable intake. Except her identification tag disappeared overnight from a locked refrigeration unit. And when it reappeared, everything I thought I understood about what funeral homes contain began to unravel. Briarwood operated like most funeral homes I had managed, procedures layered on procedures, redundancy built into every step, documentation that documented documentation. Chain of custody began at intake. Every decedent received a wristband, an ankle tag, and a metal identification disc that stayed with the body through every stage of care. We logged refrigeration access in 3 separate systems, a handwritten ledger at the prep room entrance, a digital timestamp on the electronic lock, and a clipboard inside each refrigeration bay where staff initialed every opening. It was excessive. I had told Harold as much during my 2nd week. Better excessive than insufficient, he had said, which wasn't wrong, just incomplete. The staff followed protocol without complaint. Richard Owens, our senior embalmer, had been with Briarwood for 23 years. He moved through preparation procedures with the efficiency of someone who had performed them thousands of times. Our 2 funeral directors, both local, both second-generation death care professionals, handled family coordination with practiced compassion. Everyone knew their role, everyone performed it correctly. Harold Whitman remained a constant, quiet presence. Semi-retired meant he arrived most mornings by 8, retreated to his locked office by 9, and emerged only for family consultations or staff questions he deemed worthy of interruption. His office door stayed closed even during business hours. The lock, an older model, brass, installed long before electronic access became standard, engaged with a solid click whenever he left. Old habits, he had explained, when I mentioned that locking interior offices was unusual in modern funeral home operations. I let it go. Men his age carried their own systems, their own reasons. It was during my third month, mid-March, 2 weeks before Lillian Harper's intake, that I first noticed the pattern in our storage records. I was reconciling refrigeration logs against intake documentation, routine quarterly inventory, when certain entries caught my attention. Not errors, not violations, just pauses. Decedent held overnight pending family confirmation. Processing delayed 48 hours, documentation review. Refrigeration extended, awaiting transfer authorization. Standard language, standard delays, except there were no corresponding notes explaining why. No family disputes in the intake files, no pending autopsy authorizations, no legal holds, no transfer complications, just time. Days in some cases. Bodies remaining in refrigeration longer than necessary without documented cause. I pulled older records. The pattern continued backward through years of otherwise meticulous documentation, clusters of cases every few months where decedents stayed longer than protocol required, always with vague notation, never with specific reason codes. I found Richard Owens in the preparation room, cleaning instruments with the methodical attention he brought to everything. I'm reconciling refrigeration logs. There are gaps in the delay explanations, cases held without reason codes. Richard dried a scalpel, placed it in the sterilization tray. Which cases? I showed him my notes, dates going back 18 months. He glanced at the list, shrugged. Old cases, back when things were different. Different how? He returned to cleaning instruments. The stainless steel clinked softly against the tray. Just different record-keeping standards, before everything went digital. These delays went beyond record-keeping. Some of these bodies were held 4 or 5 days without explanation. Sometimes families need time to decide on arrangements. His tone remained even, practiced. Sometimes there are internal processing backlogs. Then why isn't that documented? Richard set down the instrument he was holding and looked at me directly. Daniel, you're doing good work here, thorough, professional, but sometimes old systems have their own logic. Harold's been running this place before I started. If he didn't document every delay with a 3-paragraph explanation, it's because he didn't need to. It was dismissal wrapped in reassurance. The conversation was over. I returned to my office, but the unease remained. That night, working late to finish documentation, I heard the building settle. Old structures do that, wood contracting as temperature drops, pipes adjusting to pressure changes, foundations shifting incrementally over decades. Every sound had a rational explanation. The creaking from the basement, the soft knock of pipes, the distant sound that might have been a door closing, or might have been a pressure change, or might have been nothing at all. I explained each sound to myself logically, professionally, the way I had been trained to separate observable fact from emotional interpretation. But when I left that night, locking the front entrance behind me, I realized I had been listening for patterns in those sounds, counting them, the way someone scratches tally marks on a wall. I accepted the unease. It came with old buildings, old systems, old men who kept their offices locked. What I wouldn't accept was ignorance. If there were gaps in our records, I would find them. If there were patterns, I would document them. That's what operations managers do. We make invisible systems visible, even when those systems don't want to be seen. The preparation room at night had a different quality than during operational hours. The overhead fluorescents cast everything in sterile white. Stainless steel tables reflected light without warmth. Tile floors gleamed cold and empty. Instrument trays sat in precise rows waiting for morning. I was conducting a routine embalming audit, equipment compliance verification against updated health department standards, the kind of administrative task best done after hours when the building was silent and I could work without interruption. Harold had left at 5. Richard had finished his last preparation by 6. The funeral directors were gone. I had the building to myself. I was inspecting the ventilation system behind the primary preparation table when I noticed the wall. Scratches. Faint marks clustered near the baseboard where stainless steel met painted cinder block. I crouched for a closer look. Not random damage, not accidental scuffing. Tallies. Groups of 4 vertical lines crossed by a 5th, the universal symbol of counting. At least 30 visible marks, maybe more hidden beneath layers of paint that had tried to cover them. Someone had attempted to sand them smooth, but the grooves remained, faint impressions that caught the light at certain angles. Someone had counted something here. I traced the scratches with my fingertip. They were old, worn smooth by time and deliberate erasure attempts, some nearly invisible, others deep enough to feel. I stood back, tried to rationalize what I was seeing. Renovation damage, equipment removal, old mounting brackets scraped during table replacement. But tallies weren't structural damage. Tallies were intentional. Tallies meant someone had stood exactly here, marking days or events or something they needed to track without official documentation. The question wasn't what made the marks. The question was what they were counting. I photographed them, measured their height, 32 inches from the floor, exactly where someone working at the preparation table would naturally reach, documented their location relative to the refrigeration units. Then I waited until morning to ask Harold. He arrived at 8, unlocked his office, hung his coat on the same brass hook he'd probably used for 40 years. I gave him 15 minutes before knocking. "Come in." His office looked like it hadn't changed since 1985. Dark wood desk, metal filing cabinets, framed certifications from industry organizations, furniture chosen for function rather than comfort. I showed him the photographs on my phone. "I found these last night behind the primary prep table. They've been sanded and painted over, but they're still visible." Harold studied the images without expression. His face remained perfectly neutral. "What do you think they are?" "Tally marks, someone counting, repeatedly, over an extended period." He handed the phone back. "This place has seen a lot, Daniel." His voice dropped slightly. "Not all of it was meant to last." The shift was subtle but unmistakable. Not anger, not defensiveness, something heavier, something that carried weight I didn't yet understand. "What does that mean?" "It means Briarwood has been operating continuously since 1958, 63 years of continuous service, multiple directors, different staff, different," he paused, "standards of practice." "That doesn't explain why someone was marking tallies on a wall they later tried to hide." "No," he agreed, "it doesn't." He stood slowly, moved to the window overlooking the oak trees. Sometimes buildings remember things people have chosen to forget. Sometimes that's for the best. "Harold, if there's something in our operational history, what you need to understand," he interrupted quietly, "is that this building has outlived everyone who made those marks, outlived their reasons, outlived any explanation they might have given." He turned back to face me. "We maintain current standards. That's what matters." It wasn't an answer. It was a boundary. I left his office with more questions than I had brought. But I understood something else now. Briarwood wasn't just a location where death care happened. It was a structure that had absorbed 63 years of continuous operations, 6 decades of intake, preparation, storage, and release, 6 decades of bodies moving through the same rooms, handled at the same tables, stored in the same refrigeration units. Generation after generation of staff performing identical procedures in identical spaces. Whatever had been counted on that wall, whoever had counted it, was gone, but the marks remained. The building had witnessed something that required counting, something that happened regularly enough to track, something significant enough that later staff tried to erase the evidence. And if Harold was right, if buildings remembered what people chose to forget, then Briarwood itself might be part of whatever system that had required those tallies in the first place. Not just a passive structure, but an active component in processes that predated me and would continue long after I left. The building had seen something, and buildings don't forget. They just wait for someone to notice what's written in their walls. Lillian Harper arrived on March 17th at 2:34 p.m., 82 years old, natural causes, death certificate signed by her primary physician, cardiac arrest, no autopsy required. Family requested private services only, cremation to follow. Her daughter provided all necessary documentation at intake. Everything was in order. I oversaw the intake personally. Standard procedure: photograph the sealed transport pouch, verify the wristband against the death certificate, confirm identity with the family representative, assign storage location, attach the metal identification disc required by state law to remain with the body at all times, and complete the chain of custody log. Lillian Harper, Unit 3, Tag 347. Her daughter signed the intake form at 2:51 p.m. Richard logged her into refrigeration at 3:08 p.m. I countersigned the storage record at 3:15 p.m. Completely routine, completely unremarkable. The kind of case that should have moved through our system without incident. I discovered the missing tag at 7:42 a.m. the next morning. I was conducting standard refrigeration checks, verifying overnight temperature logs, confirming all units remained sealed, reviewing the access record. Unit 3 showed no entries since Richard's log at 3:08 p.m. the previous day. I opened the unit. Lillian Harper's body was exactly where it should have been, positioned properly on the tray, covered appropriately. But the metal identification disc was gone. Not misplaced, not fallen beneath the body or caught in the covering. Gone. I checked the tray, the floor of the unit, the gasket around the door. Nothing. The identification disc, a stamped metal tag attached with a tamper-evident seal specifically designed to remain with the body through every stage of care, had disappeared from a locked refrigeration unit that showed no access since the previous afternoon. I activated protocol immediately. Staff meeting at 8:15 a.m. I questioned everyone who had been in the building the previous day. Richard confirmed he had personally attached the tag and verified the seal. Both funeral directors confirmed they hadn't accessed Unit 3. Our part-time administrative assistant confirmed she'd been in the front office only. No one had entered the preparation area after Richard left at 6:30 p.m. I reviewed the access logs. Digital timestamps showed Unit 3 had been opened once, Richard's entry at 3:08 p.m. the previous day. The electronic lock registered no subsequent access. I checked the physical lock mechanism. No signs of tampering, no forced entry. The seal on the unit door showed no damage. I pulled security footage. Our cameras covered the main hallway leading to the preparation area and the entrance to the refrigeration room. The footage showed Richard entering at 3:06 p.m., exiting at 3:12 p.m. No one else approached the refrigeration units for the rest of the day. No explanation. A required identification tag had vanished from a locked, unaccessed, monitored refrigeration unit. I documented everything, photographed the empty seal attachment point, filed an internal incident report, prepared to contact our regulatory liaison. Then, at 11:20 a.m., I opened Unit 3 for a final verification before making the call. The tag was there. Not on the body, on the shelf, placed neatly beside the clipboard where we logged temperature checks. Metal disc facing up, number clearly visible, 347. I stared at it for 30 seconds before touching it. The tag was cool to the touch, refrigeration temperature. The tamper-evident seal was intact, unbroken, exactly as it should have been when attached to a body. But it was sitting on a shelf, precisely placed, deliberately positioned, not dropped, not fallen, not accidentally dislodged, placed. I called Richard into the refrigeration room. "Did you move this tag?" He looked at the shelf, then at me. "No, I attached it yesterday. Standard procedure." "It's on the shelf now." "I can see that." "Can you explain how it got there?" Richard studied the tag without touching it. "No." I reattached the tag to Lillian Harper's body, verified the seal, logged the incident, closed the unit, and felt something shift inside my understanding of what was happening at Briarwood. Not unease anymore, certainty. This wasn't administrative irregularity. This wasn't old record-keeping practices. This wasn't building sounds or faded scratches on walls. This was documented impossibility. A physical object had moved inside a locked space that showed no access, had been removed, then returned with precision that implied intent. Not malfunction, not accident, intent. I returned to my office and began pulling archives, pre-digital records, boxes stored in the basement, intake logs, burial permits, embalming notes dating back to the 1960s and 70s, decades of documentation that existed only on paper, filed away in spaces most staff never accessed. If Lillian Harper's tag was part of a pattern, the pattern would be in those records, not in what was documented, but in what wasn't. I started with 1965 and began reading forward. The building had been trying to tell me something since I arrived. Now I was finally listening. The basement archives occupied a concrete room beneath the original chapel. Metal shelving held bankers' boxes organized by decade, intake logs, burial permits, embalming records written in fountain pen on forms that predated standardized documentation. I started with the 1960s and worked forward chronologically. The handwriting changed every few years, different directors, different embalmers, different administrative staff rotating through positions that remained constant even as the people filling them did not. But certain notations appeared repeatedly. Margin notes, brief entries that weren't part of official documentation. Stayed late again. The phrase appeared in a 1967 embalming log, penciled beside a case number. No context, no explanation. I found it again in 1972, different handwriting, same words. Wouldn't stop. That phrase appeared in a 1981 storage record, then again in 1989, then 1995. Quieted after midnight. Different cases, different staff members, different decades. The same language. I photographed pages, cross-referenced dates, built a timeline that showed clusters of unusual notations appearing every few years without interruption. Cases that stayed in refrigeration longer than standard protocol. Cases marked with delays that had no documented justification. Cases accompanied by handwritten notes that suggested something beyond routine death care procedures. The pattern stretched back to Briarwood's opening in 1958. 63 years of continuous operations. 63 years of notes that said the same things in different hands. I found Harold in his office at 4:30 p.m. I didn't knock. I entered with 3 folders of photocopied records and placed them on his desk. "I've been reviewing the archives." Harold looked at the folders but didn't open them. "I know. These notes, these delays, they go back to the beginning. Different staff, same patterns, same language." He nodded slowly. "Yes. I need to know what this means." Harold sat silent for a long moment. Then he unlocked his desk drawer and removed a single key, old brass, worn smooth by decades of handling. He held it in his palm without offering it. "There's a storage room in the basement, not on any floor plan. We've kept it locked since my father's time." He looked at me directly. "Storage room B." He placed the key on the desk between us. "You'll find what you're looking for there, but understanding it," he shook his head, "that's different than finding it." Storage room B was located behind the furnace room, accessed through a door I had assumed was mechanical storage. The key turned smoothly despite its age. Inside were metal shelving units holding sealed containers, urns without nameplates, metal boxes without labels, document tubes sealed with wax, all arranged with the same meticulous organization that characterized everything else at Briarwood. And on a small table near the door, a ledger bound in cracked leather. I opened it. Dates. Only dates, listed in columns spanning page after page. Some entries from the 1960s, some from the 1970s and 80s, more recent entries from the 2000s, the most recent from 8 months ago. No names, no case numbers, no explanations, just dates marking something that had happened regularly, continuously, for more than 60 years. Harold appeared in the doorway behind me. "What is this?" I asked. He moved slowly into the room, looking at the shelves with an expression I couldn't read. Not quite sadness, not quite resignation, something older. "Things people left behind," he said quietly. "Things that didn't leave on their own." "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed, "but it's the only one I have." I gestured at the containers. "These are remains?" "Some of them, not all." He touched one of the unlabeled urns. "Some are just evidence that something stayed longer than it should have, physical remnants of whatever wouldn't move on." "You're telling me Briarwood has been containing what? Spirits? Manifestations?" "I'm telling you that some of the dead don't leave when we expect them to, and when that happens, we document it." He indicated the ledger. "My father documented it. His predecessor documented it. I've documented it. Whoever comes after me will document it too." "Why not report it? Why not—" "Report what, Daniel? That a funeral home sometimes experiences delays we can't explain? That bodies occasionally resist standard processes? That buildings this old develop their own patterns?" He shook his head. "Who would we report that to? What would change?" Nothing, I realized. Nothing would change. Because Briarwood had been operating this way since 1958. had served families, maintained its reputation, followed regulations, and quietly managed whatever couldn't be explained through official channels. The system had worked for 63 years, and I had just discovered I was part of it. I resigned the next day. Harold accepted my notice without argument. "I understand," was all he said. Briarwood funeral services closed 6 months later under what the local paper described as voluntary restructuring. The building was sold to a medical supply company. The records were sealed under attorney-client privilege. No investigation was ever made public. I took a position at a newer facility 3 counties away. Modern construction, digital-only records, no history extending beyond its 10-year operational period. But sometimes when I drive through small towns and see funeral homes still operating under the same family names decade after decade, I think about those ledgers, about the tallies on the wall, about the bodies that stayed longer than they should have, and the staff who quietly documented what they couldn't explain. I think about institutions that outlive individual accountability, about systems that continue because they've always continued, about the spaces where the dead are meant to transition, but sometimes don't. And I wonder how many other funeral homes have storage rooms not listed on blueprints. How many have ledgers filled with dates instead of names? How many serve families during the day and manage what remains after dark? Briarwood didn't just remember the dead, it kept them. Some buildings don't just witness what happens within their walls, they participate, they contain, they hold on to what was never meant to leave, and they do it quietly, professionally, for decades, until someone notices the pattern, until someone asks the questions that don't have comfortable answers, until someone opens the door to Storage Room B and understands that death care isn't always about helping people move on. Sometimes it's about managing what refuses to.